Congress taking up a bill that would provide reparations for African Americans.
Our political analyst and college professor Ric Epps joining us now to talk about the timing and the debate over this bill. Rick, good morning. Nice to see you again.
Morning. Good to see you guys.
Okay, let's talk. What is the goal of this legislation? Give us a little history background on this, if you could.
Well, the goal is to really begin the study and to further the discussion about reparations for African Americans based on the historical legacy of slavery. And it's not just about the idea of slavery and the social destruction of slavery. It's, which I will add which is what led to racism. Slavery is an economic construct. You need exploitable labor. The result of that was racism, which actually institutionalizes the concept of slavery. You build a group of people, bring a group of people in, you make sure they can't be educated, you purposely set them up to be an underclass, and then you exploit them. And so the idea is, what do we do with this social injustice? How do we deal with that? And this is so the goal for House Measure 40 was to be able to begin the study of how we were going to deal with this issue of possibly whether it be some sort of compensation, economic compensation, or something to deal with this issue.
And like you just mentioned, this is not a new concept.
No.
So why is it coming up now?
Well, it's come up a few times before. It's been about a decade, even though there's been several conversations along the way over the last 10 years, but it's come up multiple times since the end of slavery in 1860, well, what we call the end of slavery in 1865. And so in the context of that, there's been several commentaries that have come out that have justified the possibility of reparations. One of the most ardent supporters was a gentleman named Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote an article in 2014 for the Atlantic magazine that basically made a justification for reparations. And it really had to do with, okay, well, you can't just bypass the realities of what happens during the context of slavery. You can't just whitewash it. You can't just allow the mythology of history that's been taught in America to really undermine the social destruction of slavery.
The arguments for and against this, is the goal of this bill to actually give out reparations, or is it more of an educational thing and to point a finger at the inaccuracies of the way we're telling our history? Or will there actually be money being given out? So it's more of a lesson is what I'm asking than anything else.
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a combination of one, bringing awareness to this, because there really is a misunderstanding, I think, for most people about the context of slavery. We're taught a certain mythos about slavery in our history books, and we give very little diligence to it. So we sort of keep perpetuating the same cycle of ignorance, if you would, around the issue, because we don't really discuss it in context. But I think it is also a lesson, intellectual lesson, to be able to sort of provide a framework for us to move forward on the possibility of compensation, even though some people have called it the possibility of like, well, this is blood money and how dare you take money from us, and other people said it would further erode the country and separate us. But I think there's a better story to be told if you look beyond just those details and looking at this issue.
Well, like you mentioned, there was a fiery debate yesterday on Capitol Hill, and you even had. I remember specifically listening to Coleman Hughes. He's an African American writer student in New York, and he said the same thing. He said that reparations. Well, he was arguing that it would divide the country further. And he was saying that it would be an insult, even. Yeah,
some people believe that. There's some even African Americans who take that stance that it's like, why are you giving us blood money and it is an insult to us? But there were others on the other side of that said, well, look at what we've done for other groups of people, and the reality is there's no way that you can really come to any real sense of money, of how much the life of a human being is worth, and for 250 years of slavery, how do we contend with that? And I think that's still the struggle, because you have those, even amongst those groups who have been in struggle for hundreds of years, whether it be blacks or other groups of people, that the fact is that there are many people within those groups that really don't understand, because they haven't been educated either in the context of what this really means.
So you mentioned this was brought up about 10 years ago. Was the last time? Will anything come of this, or?
It's going to be tough. Through the House, it might get through the House, but it's going to be tough because getting through the Senate with Mitch McConnell, who has made some just unbelievable statements. And one of the things he had said was he made a comment about Obama and said, well, look, we gave you, and I'm paraphrasing, gave you a black president, so what's the issue? And 150 years, why are we held for it now? But the truth is, and I can't stress this enough, it wasn't, 150 years ago slavery ended. supposedly. But we forget about the realities of his history since slavery, that the blacks in the South, basically, though they were free, weren't free. Most of them went back to work for the people who had been enslaved.
Right.
The government gave reparations to the slave owners after the Civil War for losing their property, not to the slaves themselves. And the 40 acres and mule that they talked about, well, when Andrew Johnson came in after Lincoln, he pulled all that off the table. So there was nothing for these people for the next, in fact, it wasn't until 1965 that we really saw any movement regarding the legislation. So just because they had an amendment on the books, none of the states and the federal government did not even take a step toward protecting them. And by the way, I will end with this and tell you that the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says that the federal government supersedes all state constitution and state laws. And you saw throughout that 100-year period that the federal government did nothing to protect those blacks in the South and other areas, even though the states were enacting Jim Crow laws and things to inhibit the blacks in those areas and other groups of people from having any economic or social success. So it's an understandably hot issue, and one that we have to do our due diligence, but it starts by education and confronting the truth about what reparations is and the injustice that was really done. And we don't do that in school, so people don't learn the real truth and the ugliness of what took place.
There's a lot in our history that we think we know that maybe we don't know the full scope of it.
Absolutely.
Professor Ric Epps, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.